may be wondering why Joyce and I are up here on the stage. So we're going to tell you about both an organization that has been working in this field and a project or an initiative that came out of that organization, particularly after, specifically following October 7th, 2023. And we hope that it will leave you actually inspired. 30 years and 1 month since the events that were depicted here, something that can give us hope that the course of history can be redirected once again. So I'll have Joyce start with talking about News Story leadership.
Hi, you can hear me, right?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Do I
No,
need to use
you
the
need-
mic?
Yes.
I do. Okay, because I would give it up if I could. First of all, thank you for being such a great audience and for staying. We really appreciate it. My name is Joyce Schwartz, and I have been on the board of News Story Leadership since it began in 2010. There's another board member here as well, been there with me, Greg, right there, raise your hand, Greg. And his wife Leanne, who's also been very involved and on the board as well. So, we obviously really care about this organization because we're all still with it 15 years later. And they haven't been the easiest 15 years, I will just say that. So originally, this program grew out of a similar one for Irish students called the Washington Ireland program. And we adopted, at first at least, many of the particulars of that program. So we brought students over to DC in the summer for a couple of months. They lived with host families. They had work placements all over town, now exclusively on the Hill. And it was really a storytelling program, which it still is in many ways, but that's how we started. And as that program has evolved, so have we. We are now training our participants, our delegates as we call them, in a much more rigorous manner in other ways. So we are teaching them not only to tell their personal stories effectively and to reach audiences that way, but also to become allies with partners both here and in the region, how to get together with those allies and advocate at home for the kind of change we'd all like to see, to bring the two sides together to find a peaceful way to resolve this conflict. And I should tell you that the group that we bring over is usually about 10 students, although the pandemic and then the war have really given us problems. We have really not been able to bring a regular class, though we would like to this coming year. And we always strove to get 5 Israelis, 5 Palestinians, 5 men, 5 women. That didn't always succeed, but what we did do was get Israelis from all over Israel, from every part of it, Palestinians from Gaza, from the West Bank, and from Israel itself. So it was quite a diverse group of people that we brought over here between the ages of 21 and 30. And we also were really interested in having people with different viewpoints, from different faith backgrounds, as much as possible to bring together the diverse population that lives in that very small area and give them a chance not only to get to know one another and to talk to one another and then tell their stories to us, but also to tell their stories on the Hill and to the wider Washington community. And in that way, to try to really exemplify our motto, which was and is, change the story, change the world. That is what it's a big ambition, and we haven't come near to accomplishing it, but we do try. And that's what I would say. And the last thing I want to say is that many of our graduates have spun off their own programs. Not only the one that Tarek will talk to you about, but if you've heard of the Museum of the Palestinian People, which is in DuPont Circle, that's a graduate. The person who started that, who raised the funds for it, who started it, is a 2011 graduate of NSL, News Story Leadership. We had another graduate in 2013 who began a negotiation program called Shades, which is now sponsored by Harvard. We had another one in 2019, Gilad, who started a program called, I always blank on this, I'm sorry. It's a program he started it first to teach students, Jewish students at Hebrew University to speak Hebrew. It was an online program, and then it became, and madrasa, and then became an in-person meetup group. So that's just only a few of the things that our graduates have started after going through our program. Even if they'd had the ideas for it before they came, they really pushed and got them going then. So I hope that some of you might look us up and look them up and find out more.
Thank you, Joyce. So, and I do also want to add to that, they're like when they are on the Hill, these are some of the only touch points that congressional members and staff have to the real lived experiences on the ground. And over the years, we find, Congress members who really look forward to hosting the NSL delegates. We've had stories where there are meetings that are happening where the Congress member will just look over at the NSL delegate and say, tell me, and it totally enriches the conversation from one that is so distant and abstracted in many cases. So it gives them something that personalizes and creates a kind of expertise in these offices that otherwise they don't have. And some of it has led to putting things into the record that otherwise wouldn't have been, pushing for legislation like ALMEC funding through the congressional champions that have NSL placements in their office, getting to meet with diplomats. Sometimes NSL, specifically during COVID, was one of the only organizations that was pulled in to meet at high levels. I want to take us to October 7th, 2023. It's also my birthday. And I was on a belated honeymoon with my wife and lovely partner, who happens to be both an NSL participant,
executive director,
but I'm pointing to you because she?
She was my host,
she was
our
your,
host daughter.
She was your
Yes,
her
she
host
was
daughter.
We always brag about her.
Executive director. She's actually on a flight right now from Tel Aviv coming in, and unfortunately it won't arrive until 8 in the morning. So we're not going to have her amazing company. And now sits on the board. And what for us, October 7th, that the morning meant was a scramble, first and foremost. Her mother was in the West Bank. I have family in Israel. We have friends in Gaza. And we immediately got on our phones and spent several hours reaching out, sometimes lines being disconnected, and figuring out who was where, who was safe, and how to get her mother out of the West Bank, knowing that things were going to close down likely very quickly. We ended the honeymoon in a very bittersweet kind of way in Paris. And the moment we got back, NSL alums, some of them started to reach out to each other. How are you doing? What's going on? Are you safe? Where's your family? Now this was something, as someone who's been in the peace building community within this Israel-Palestine context, this is something I was seeing falling apart. I mean, amongst communities that were very close, binational communities, there was this circling of wagons that had happened. Not with this handful of NSL alum. And they actually released one of the first joint statements to come after October 7th, calling for ceasefire, release of hostages, and humanitarian access. But they were unsatisfied with that act alone. And so it's from that emerged the idea, well, in the face of such a grave crisis, I mean, such an unimaginable horror, such magnitude, why don't we find in that something equally visionary, equally big? And so the inspiration was birthed to think of a post-war plan but one that wouldn't rehash the final status issues that Yitzhak Rabin and Arafat had negotiated in Oslo II around borders and refugees and Jerusalem, things that had been reiterated time and again, but rather to look at what was blocking those things from moving forward. Issues around governance, transitional justice, accountability, the reintegration economically of reconstructed Gaza, looking at preparing the public for peace at a large enough scale that we wouldn't have this kind of demonization that was happening between peoples that would lead to assassinations and massacres. And so gave rise to what we came to call the Phoenix Plan, named after actually a monument in Gaza City that has long since been destroyed. And of course the mythical bird of rising from the ashes with hope and transcendence in its sights. So that's the Phoenix framework then became the advocacy piece for 2 years of NSL alums coming together. 2 visits to Congress, visits to Berlin, to Paris, to Brussels with the EU, to New York with the UN, to Geneva with the UN, to various different think tanks, including the U.S. Institute of Peace, now renamed the Donald J. Trump U.S. Institute of Peace, the Middle East Institute, various coalitions endorsed by the Alliance for Peace Building, the biggest peace building organization alliance there is. And so I must say, from that day on October 7th, I had the fortune of being able to be part of something as a facilitator of that process that actually gave me a channel into which I could pour the immense grief and despair that I felt with something that seemed equally but opposingly hopeful and encouraging. So we're here now today. The what we call the Phoenix Framework is on its 3rd edition. We revise it. We revised it, for example, when the violence was regionalizing into Lebanon and Iran, and we plan to have another revision that incorporates a whole new section on the role of women in this process. And we're at a special time where now, while we've been all around the European and kind of North American space, now we're at a time where we can bring this conversation into Israel and Palestine as well, where conversations about the future are relevant, are appropriate, are sensitive to the times. So I think
We had some questions.
yeah,
We had a question
we'll
about.
open. Right. What was your question?
It was, I remember, it was, the play that we just saw brought out all the tensions and dislike and hatred between certain groups in Israel, because it focused only on Israel. And so the question was, what's it like now, 20 years later? Does that continue?
Yes.
Is it better, is it worse? I mean, my sense is that certainly after October 7th, it got a lot worse, because you can't have an event like that and not have the tensions just rise to the highest heights and make people who used to talk to one another not trust each other anymore. Although there are certainly exceptions. I mean, I will tell you about one real quickly, and that is one of our graduates who is now part of the Phoenix group, and she has, over the last few years, befriended a woman in Gaza whom she did not know before, and has helped to raise money to buy her blankets and food and beds for herself and her children. And so here's a good example of people working across a huge divide to try to get to know and be compassionate with someone whom you could reasonably expect each of them to see as an enemy. So there's a perfect example, I think, of what can happen but what often doesn't, and especially now. I don't know, you may have a much better view of this.
I mean, I think what I want to raise is that in the 1990s, as much as the play
Always
portrayed a divided society and a lot of pushback, and certainly I think it's important to know historically that an acknowledgement of the PLO, which probably first happened in Madrid in right at the beginning of the 90s, and then was public in Oslo I, that really was a huge shift in discourse in Israel, right? So granted, there's a big change happening in this point in time, but at the same time, the 1990s were also really the height of the peace movement in Israel. People were mobilized. Peace Now boasted membership in almost the millions. Like there was such an air of hope, a momentum, and so we really have gone through an incredible slump since then, but it's already 20 years in the making. Right? The peace movement in Israel didn't just stumble on October 7th. The Second Intifada saw it dwindling, and I think what we're talking about is a society that is, when the violence has come from the Palestinian side, particularly as we've seen October 7th, that loses the ability, the imagination, the hope that we saw in the 1990s. And I, is there a hand? Yeah.
Harry.
I wanted you to expand a little bit on the generational critique that the Phoenix Group articulates and relate it to the play.
Yeah.
Which is to say, for this peer group you're speaking of, admirable what they're doing, how do they view the Rabin legacy, and how do they view the shortcomings, and you touched on it already in your presentation, of Oslo, but speak a little more specifically about how that group would respond to this play and this moment that's captured in all of its heartbreak and shortcomings.
There's so much to say about. I'll say first of all, Rabin is a complex character and a controversial one, as being heavily criticized for the policies he had in suppressing the first Intifada, which was largely a nonviolent movement. I mean, it was co-opted in its later years by Hamas, but it started out with incredible waves of nonviolent, many of which were organized by women on the Palestinian side. And then he does this about face, and I think one of the things that our group is willing to do is, one, we're willing to acknowledge the past, but we're willing to meet you where you are now. And so Rabin, who's no longer with us, of course, but I think would have been accepted as an ally based on what he was willing to do and where he is willing to put his reputation. And allyship, I think, is one of the hallmarks of the group and of NSL. This idea, and it's a contested thing, right? We can be in spaces where allyship is considered normalization and does not move a political agenda forward. We believe, not just because it feels good, but we believe that allyship is necessary for political change if we're going to have anything move in Israel-Palestine. So we have this cohort model that we've talked about with Israelis and Palestinians both housed together and advocating together and serving in a congressional office together. I'd say another part that's partly generational, that has to do with our initiative is, I would say that we, right now, in the dozen or so peace plans that we've seen over the last 30 years, they've been negotiated by elites. They've been negotiated largely by people in their 70s or over, and that's no exception in current times. People who still frame and see the conflict in the way they did starting in the 1930s and 40s, like Rabin did when he was fighting with the Haganah. And so one of the things that a newer generation brings is a different relationship to both the past and the future of Israel-Palestine. And so what I found incredibly heartening is in the 6-month process of developing the Phoenix framework is that here we're a group of 10, and as a facilitator who's facilitated hundreds of hours of dialogue, I was ready, and this is months after October 7th, I was ready for us to be totally unproductive when it came to generating any kind of work product, but very productive in like emotional kind of processing and things like that. They went straight into their creativity, and I think they were grounded in this fundamental idea that we are intertwined. There is no way around that. We can't get rid of each other, right? Which I think there are still older generations, certainly in Hamas leadership and in Israeli leadership, who somehow believe they can make it through without hearing, living, experiencing the other side. I don't know how. For our group, it was clear that's not an option, right? That's not an option. You can't get rid of 10 million people in this piece of land, somehow even separating them within. So that was very much like, let us figure out how we're going to make this work, intertwined as one joint destiny. And I think that's a spirit of the Phoenix that is unlike what I've seen elsewhere.
You know, Tarek, can I just say, I'll just say one thing. Okay, I've got this. And it's about the play. You know, if this had been a lecture this evening about Oslo 1 and 2 and Yitzhak Rabin, assassination, we would have forgotten all of it by the time we reached our car. And the reason why this was so powerful is that it was a play. It was art. And one thing that New Story leadership has tried to do from the beginning and persists in doing is encouraging the next generation and each generation of students, of our delegates who come, to tell stories, create some art that contextualizes their current experience, and also they're going to look back at who is Rabin for them, or any other events in the past. And we don't want to forget the power of art and plays like this to shape consciousness and the narrative going forward.
Hear, hear.
I just wanted to add on a bit to what Tarek had to say very quickly. I mean, one of the things that makes us really different, I believe, both as NSL and as the Phoenix group, is that we are talking about, as Tarek made the point, young people, young Israelis and Palestinians who usually don't have a voice in the conversation. And that's really different, and I think it's one reason that our delegates have been so successful where they've been successful on Capitol Hill. It is very unusual, not only for people in Congress to hear from Israelis and Palestinians, but young Israelis and Palestinians, and it makes quite an impression. And I will give you an example. I will use a name of Senator Van Hollen. When things are going on in the region, he gets in touch with the people who've been in his office and asks them first, how are you? How are your families? And what's going on? He wants to hear it from them. So that to me says a lot. And he's not the only one. He's just one that I know of. So that, I think, is a really big difference. That, I mean, their motto, I mean, I say ours is change the story, change the world. Their motto is don't talk about us without us.
So I noticed that the play actually premiered in Tel Aviv, and I'm curious to know, I mean, we connect, we're the inside the Beltway people here, and have a lot of politics thrown at us every day, whether we like it or not. How was the play perceived, and what has come out of the actual performance of it happening there in Israel?
Well, I think I'll answer that. And it's a very interesting transformation. The situation in Israel over the past decades has been one of rapidly forgetting the legacy of Rabin, in spite of the construction of the Yitzhak Rabin Center, which is an extraordinary museum and has a very powerful mission to it. The Israeli public, as it's grown more conservative, has also gotten quite tired of the eulogizing of Rabin. They've wanted to move on. And so as this piece was created by Americans who made Aliyah, who immigrated to Israel 40 years ago now, they also encountered their own challenges in interesting the Israeli theatrical community to this material. It was first written in English. It was presented to an English-speaking audience, and then they said, okay, it's interesting, now let's translate it into Hebrew for the Tel Aviv audience, for the national Israeli audience. A director got a hold of it and said, oh, we know all this stuff. What would be really good is to turn it into a 1-hour cabaret with 4 women. So the play premiered in Israel at the Tzavta Theater, and then went to Petach Tikva, and then it did a night in Jerusalem. It played a total of 4 performances in Israel. So not a long run. But in each venue where it performed, it was done by 4 women, all of the same basic generational age, which was late 20s, maybe 30 at the most. They had a little bit of memory of what Rabin's legacy was, and they remembered their parents grieving. So that's how it came. Our mission, when the creators contacted us, was to make this play relevant and challenging and engaging for an American audience. I think they did a very good job. We did a good job in helping to transform the play from what it was. All these songs were in the play in Hebrew, right? So and they're very powerful and persuasive in Hebrew. It was a question of context. And the context of presenting this material, that's why I throw it back to you, the context of presenting the Phoenix proposal, the plan in Israel, is going to meet up with so many challenges and so much dismissiveness and derision from people on the ground who will both welcome and push back in equal measure. And I wonder if you can talk about preparations for that.
Yeah, so one of the things that the framework has that you won't find in any of the other plans is a whole suite of new deliberative technologies. How many of you, raise your hand if that says anything to deliberative tech? Have you heard any of this? Okay.
No.
I mean, one of the advantages of us progressing into the 2020s now, and nearing on the 2030s and the AI era and so forth, is that some of this technology can actually serve us.
Yeah, I just want to mention, because she brought up Chris Van Hollen. So I typed in, because I'm pretty watching the news, I'm follow the news a lot. I typed in for the AI, I'm looking for my question, so I wanted to read it exactly, but I can tell you the generalization. I said, what, because of all the anti-Semitic that's been going on in the Ivy League schools, Columbia, Harvard, everywhere, the pro-Hamas stuff. So I looked up, so what has Senator Van Hollen done to help support this, stopping the anti-Semitism in there? There's nothing, okay? He's going against, Josh Hawley tried to have Columbia, Harvard to stop that kind of behavior and put pressure on them, and he wouldn't support it. He didn't vote for it. So I have Jewish in my family too, but I'm a Christian. I'm mostly Gentile, but I follow this, and I'm just flabbergasted at the just. It's almost like you guys just don't care. Like you are okay with Hamas wanting to, like, there's no pushback, there's no, and you talked about your program and stuff like that, and you want to celebrate Chris Van Hollen. Oh, he's not doing anything.
My point wasn't to celebrate him. My point was the impact of